So do I think that he should be shouting on the rooftops about every injustice that affects African Americans? No. I think that's the NAACP's job. I think that's the Urban League's job. I think those are pastors and preachers' job that have a social justice ministry. I think those are elected officials who are in primarily African American districts' job. I think there are those that have said that they're social justice activists who give a whole bunch of speeches but don't necessarily do any pragmatic work's job. I think that's their job. And I think when they do their job, I mean, the historical example, probably the era where we saw the most progress legislatively was under President Johnson. President Johnson didn't have a black agenda, but much of the legislation that has positively affected the African American community came under his presidency. Why? Because Roy Wilkins was sitting in his office. Because King was moving. Because Malcolm was moving. Because SNCC was moving. Because the SCLC was moving. They were carrying the banner of a black agenda where the president didn't have an option but to respond to the areas of it that made sense legislatively to the place that the country needed to be moving in. If we as a people are relying on President Obama to do that, then we have let go of an entire legacy that's gotten us to the place where we're supposed to be. I'm satisfied with President Obama showing up with his black wife and his black babies, be an example of culture. But if we want progress, we have to push for it.
I want to go back to the clinic.
Yes, sir.
The Cleveland Clinic recently announced its plans and is undergoing a transformation of Huron Road Hospital in order to more effectively serve the impoverished community of East Cleveland. And with that as an example, I challenge you to tell me what more you would have them do to not be described as institutionally racist.
Sure. And I think, let's be clear, I don't think I said that the Cleveland Clinic was institutionally racist. I said that I gave examples of institutions in Cleveland that I thought had the ability to be better neighbors of those that are less than in Cleveland. So I appreciate the example that you've laid out as it relates to Huron Road Hospital. But to answer your question directly, what do I believe that they can do? I believe that the Cleveland Clinic has an obligation to itself as an institution to be able to continue to keep the doors open. I believe it has an obligation as an institution to be able to be excellent in the fields of medicine that they have established themselves for decades to be leaders in. I think they have an obligation to be able to continue to be a source of global health care for those that want to have excellent kind of care. But I also think that there are ways to acknowledge that they are also a part of the Cleveland community. And I think the ways to do that, pragmatically, are begin to have greater community relations that are less about the expansion and more about what's going on in those communities that we as an institution can support. That doesn't mean that Cleveland Clinic has the ability to write grants for every social service program in the communities around them. That means that if they simply showed up to community association meetings and put themselves in a position to understand the needs and concerns of that community, and then began to create non-traditional partnerships with them, with the clinic as an institution, to be able to expand that community, that there would be a perception shift of those in those communities, again, that I think I mentioned in the last comment, in the last answer, that as opposed to being an occupying force, that they're a member of a community. And I think that happens through communication. I don't think that we should expect the Cleveland Clinic, and I hate that this has become an example of institutional racism in Cleveland, but I understand how my remarks have sparked that. However, I do think that Cleveland Clinic can go a little bit further, not to be a beneficent funder to the community around it, but by being part of that community, by attending events, by being involved, by talking to members of the community, by being concerned about what's there, by supporting things when it becomes appropriate to do so, and by finding ways to have events in the Cleveland Clinic that are a part of the community. And so we should begin to talk about Policy Bridge having a lecture series at the Cleveland Clinic. But I also said, and I think this is a very important point, that I'm talking about my perceptions as a native Clevelander who comes back. And I think that that was a very important point because I don't know the nuances. And so I'm not here to indict the Cleveland Clinic. They're just a huge example. And I think that it's important to be able to look at them as an example of what the potential is. Because if they're the largest institution, in many cases they have the greatest capacity. And because they have the greatest capacity, I would hope that the way that they've set precedent in everything else that they do, they could set precedent in how to be an incredible community neighbor.
Would you please excuse my ignorance? Would you define hip-hop?
Sure. Hip-hop is a musical genre created in the late 60s and early 70s in New York by a DJ by the name of Kool Herc. He was Jamaican-born and came to the United States and was in the Bronx. And Bronx and Queens are the boroughs of New York that are credited for creating the musical genre called hip-hop. What he did was simply be able to connect two turntables together. And so when a party was going on, instead of the music having to stop, he could keep it going. So it made the party better. He coined it hip-hop. If that was all, that wouldn't have been enough. But a guy by the name of Africa Bambaataa, who was the leader of a gang called the Black Spades, which was the largest gang in New York at the time, was tired of seeing the violence that was happening at dance clubs with the gangs. And so he changed the Black Spades into an organization called the Zulu Nation. And the Zulu Nation created elements of hip-hop. So it's DJing, the person that's on the turntables, MCing, the actual rapper, B-boys or B-girls that are break dancers or dancers, and taggers, which are graffiti artists. He created a social infrastructure, that's elements, as the elements for hip-hop. And as a result, he created a subculture that was able to go beyond the music. If there had not been that subculture, I don't think we'd be talking about hip-hop now. But that was there. Thank you so much. Sure. Thank you for the question.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to a Friday Forum featuring Jeffrey Johnson, CEO of Jeff's Nation and author of Everything I'm Not Made Me Everything I Am. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.